My Bible is opened to Numbers chapter 13. Hope that you will open up in your Bibles to that text. That, as well as Numbers 14, is going to be our text this evening. For the most part, we will be spending our time there. We'll have a few other places that we need to look this evening. But so if you'll put a marker there, we'll keep coming back to that. But on the whole, we're going to be spending our time in Numbers 13 and 14 this evening. It's good to see everyone out this evening. It's always so good to be together. It's a blessing that we get to be with one another once more, that we can worship our God together is always a wonderful thing. So good to see everyone out. So good to worship our God together. I shared this morning, as we were working our way through the Bible story, that we were going to be stepping into the place of the Exodus, running up right up against the wall of the wilderness wandering, where Israel comes to a place of not putting their faith in God to deliver the land to them, to act upon his promise. But as we step into Numbers 13 and 14, we're going to find a couple of people who do put their faith in God, who do say God is absolutely able to give us this land. And I have talked about this story before. At the time, I called it Dare to Stand, like Joshua and Caleb. I've shortened that title this evening, and I have just called this Dare to Stand. And that's going to be the theme in which we're going to work this picture of Numbers 13 and 14, that we would dare to take the stand that Joshua and Caleb took in these chapters. The song that we just sang, to dare to stand like Joshua, is based upon Joshua 24 and verse 15, much later in the life of Joshua, where he does make the stand to say that he and his house will be servants of the Lord. And certainly that is an excellent text, an excellent song, an excellent thought to work out of. But we want to rewind earlier into Joshua's life and into Caleb's life to see the stand that they take in this place. And so as we dare to make this stand, as we look at the example of Joshua and Caleb here, we want to dare to stand even if we stand alone. Let's consider this story that I think we are, at least in part, familiar with. You know that 12 spies were sent into the land. If you want to read the various names of those spies, you can pick back up earlier in chapter 13, and you can read verses 2 through 15. We're just going to work on the spies and what they said here, where we see the majority of them. There were 10 of them that said, yep, no way. We're just not going to be able to take the land. If we can pick up chapter 13 and verse 31. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. This is the report of 10 of the spies. We are not able to take the land. They are stronger, and we'll get into their various reasonings in the next point. But just recognizing here, the vast majority said, it's just not going to happen. When we come to the report of Joshua and Caleb, jumping into chapter 14 and picking up verse 6, and Joshua the son of Nun, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out, it is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. 12 spies were sent in. 10 of them say, not going to happen. 2 of them say, absolutely. The Lord can give it to us. What do we see there? I feel like I have been emphasizing this a ton here lately, but I've just been bringing out so many numbers as of late that it just feels right to say, as a guy who's not a math guy, I can put those numbers together and I can see which one is a lot bigger. Says the vast majority of these people are saying we're not going to be able to take the land, which then affects the entire congregation of Israel who is receiving this report, who then believe we are not going to be able to take the land. And there are 2. This tiny minority that say, we can take the land. This is the stand that Joshua and Caleb dared to take. That even standing on their own, the congregation of Israel around them absolutely denying their message, they dared to stand in defense of their God, even while being in the minority. Here's what we need to recognize and see in this story of Joshua and Caleb. God's people are in the minority. I mean, doesn't Jesus teach us that? We'll head out of Numbers here for just a moment. We are familiar with this passage, but let's pick it up in Matthew 7 and verse 13 here. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. That's the minority. That is the smaller number who have found the way unto life. You think about the days of Noah. You have an entire world versus 8 people who are saved in the ark. You get into the story of Elijah versus the prophets of the Baal, and you have one Elijah, and you have 450 prophets of Baal. What about Elisha and his servant, where they are terrified as they are being surrounded by this army that is coming against them? Or at least the servant is terrified because here are 2 people, the servant and Elisha, and there is an entire army that is surrounding them. Each of these stories, each of these a picture of they're God's people, standing for God, standing for God's way, standing for righteousness. And what are they? They're the few. What are they? They are in the minority, while there are a large number around them who would stand for wickedness, who would stand for the way of this world, who would stand for unfaithfulness. And so how would we stand, or dare to stand rather, even if we stand alone? Well, we would dare, even as Joshua and Caleb dared in this text. And here is part of how we would make this daring. God's people are never alone. Consider it with me as we look at Joshua and Caleb standing by one another. If we can pick up 14 and verse 6 again. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. Here you have Joshua and Caleb standing by one another, proclaiming the message together that the land is good and God can give it to us. They're not alone. Our brethren stand by us as we stand for our God. Let's think about some of those other stories that we brought up just a moment ago. Elijah versus the 450 prophets of Baal. And you'll remember after this great demonstration, as it's shown that God is the God and his life is threatened and he runs away, and God makes it known to him. Elijah, I know you feel alone, but there are still yet 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Elijah, I know you feel like you're the only one, but you're not. You are standing with others. Dare to stand like Joshua and Caleb, who stood by one another in defense of God's promise, of God doing what God said he was going to do. But now let's bring this down almost into an imaginary situation. Indeed, not almost, it is an imaginary situation, because here we see Joshua and Caleb standing by one another, but let's pluck one of them out of the text. Let's say Joshua is not inside of this text, or let's say Caleb is not inside this text. It's just one of them. What happens if even our brethren are not standing beside us? And we make the point, God's people are never alone. Well, here's what happens. Our God stands by us. Pick that up with me in verse 10. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones, but the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. Here, Joshua and Caleb making the proclamation. We can take the land. Let's go into the land. The Lord will give us the land. And the people, rather than accepting the message of the promise of God, said, we need to kill these two. We need to put them to death. And who appears? Who is there? God shows up. His glory shows up. And I don't think it's any accident that it shows up in this moment. Kind of like we talk about in Genesis. It wasn't an accident. They ate of the fruit, and in the next moment, God's walking through the garden asking them where they are. That didn't happen by chance. This happens. I'm going to stone them to death. And then the glory of the Lord appears. What's God saying there? I'm standing by those who are standing for me. They're not making their stand alone. They are arguing for my promise. They are arguing for my word, and I am standing by them. Let's head over to Joshua chapter 1 and verse 9 as they're going into the land, and God assures Joshua of this very thing, that they will be able to take the land. They need to be strong. They need to be courageous because he is with them. Joshua 1 and verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Be strong, Joshua. Be brave. Go in and take the land, and you're going to be able to do it because I am with you. And we take the same promise, Hebrews 13 in verses 5 and 6, that the Lord will not forsake us, that he will not abandon us, so that we are able to confidently say, the Lord is my helper. What can man do to me? That as we stand for our God, that as we stand upon his promise and his faithfulness, and we walk with him, like we have talked about previously, out of the wilderness into the land of promise, to know that he stands by us. And so we need to dare. And indeed, as we look at this world around us, it is a daring. We need to dare to stand, even if we stand alone, because we recognize we are not alone at all. Let me come back to some of those other stories. I talked about Elisha and his servant being surrounded by that Syrian army. The reason Elisha wasn't afraid and his servant is when the servant's eyes are opened and he looks and he sees God's army that surrounded them was a lot bigger than the Syrian army that was coming against them. I think about Stephen. When Stephen was standing alone, preaching a message of condemnation against the majority that surrounded him, that at the end of his life, he looks up into heaven and sees the Lord Jesus Christ. He sees who is standing by his side as he is proclaiming the word of the Lord. Our God stands by us. Like Joshua and Caleb, we want to make another stand as well. We want to make a stand when the odds are against us. Let's get back into our story in Numbers 13 here and recognize and know with great certainty that taking the land is doubtful. And it seems very doubtful as we pick up in verse 28 of chapter 13. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. And as we jumped into verse 31, then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Look at everything they bring up in their arguments. The people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities that they have built, they are fortified and they are large. There are a large number of inhabitants. Let me hone in on that one from verse 29 for just a moment. What are they saying there? Well, they seem to be saying a couple of things. One, if we're going to go in and take the whole land, that means we have to defeat all of these people, and there are a bunch of people there to defeat. They are all of these nations, and here we are, a singular nation. See that picture of minority again, even if we stand alone. But here seems to be something else that they're pointing out. Look, we're not going to be able to just sneak into the land. Every part of the land is inhabited by someone. Every part of the land has someone in it. We're going to have to go in and take the land if we're going to get into the land at all. And bring back in all these other reasons. Taking the land ain't going to happen. They are strong. They live in fortified and large cities. And these are large people. We are just not going to be able to beat them. Here's what I want you to see in everything that they just said. At least as far as the reasons that we have on the screen. They're not wrong. They're right. They can look and they can see it is a fact. The people in the land are strong. It is a fact. They live in large cities with walls around them. It is a fact that there are a large number of inhabitants, all of whom are going to have to be dealt with. And it's a fact. They see it with their own eyes. These people are big. They're not wrong about the fact. The odds are against them. Their own ability to overcome these peoples, as seen with human eyes that see fact. And they're wrong. As they say, we are not going to be able to take the land because despite these facts, despite what they could see with their eyes, Joshua and Caleb come in and they say, we can take this land. Look in verse 30. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Do you see his confidence? It's not, all right, let's kind of sneak in there and maybe we can kind of overthrow just a few at a time until maybe just a little bit we will be occupied. Let us go in. Let us occupy it. Let's go against all the people you think we're not going to be able to defeat because we are well able to overcome it. Why? Chapter 14 and verse 8 again. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. The Lord can give it to us. All of this protection that you see around them, their strength, their cities, their being bigger than us, it's all gone. It's nothing. The Lord will give us this land. And they were right. Because of this rebellion, we talked this morning in class, Israel had to wander in the wilderness. This generation, save just a few, were not permitted to enter into the land. But they were absolutely right. If the Lord delights in us, he will give us this land. We need to pick up Joshua 21 here. Joshua 21, and we're going to begin our reading in verse 43. Joshua 21:43. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. Joshua and Caleb said, trust the promise of God. God says he will give us this land. That means that as we look at it and the odds are against us, as we look at it and these people are stronger, bigger, and badder than us, God promised he'd give us the land, so he'll give us the land. The people in Numbers rejected that thought. But once the peoples are finally entered into the land, God delivers upon his promise. Upon all of his promise, it came to pass, just like Joshua and Caleb were relying on in Numbers 14. With that, I want us to make this recognition. We want to dare to stand when the odds are against us, because this is an opportunity to recognize God is powerful. And he has the power to conquer and do exactly what he has promised. I may be weak. I may not be able to get through. I may not be able to conquer the land, but God has the power and he is capable. And these moments give us the opportunity to see that and rely upon his power instead of my own. Let's see this in the life of Paul. If we can head to 2 Corinthians 12 here. 2 Corinthians 12, beginning in verse 7. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul says, I'm weak. And I have this weakness. And when I asked God about taking it away, God said, no. It says, so that you will learn to trust in my power. So that you'll not boast in yourself and boast in your power and boast in your greatness. No, this humbling is going to happen so that you will learn to trust in me, so that you will learn in this weakness of yours, it's my power that gets you through. So what's the lesson to us there? Isn't the lesson to dare to stand? Just like Joshua and Caleb dared to stand, when factually, looking at the picture before them, no way, you're not taking the land. Factually, looking at the picture before us, the odds are against us. And God says, but I have the power. I have the strength to overcome. And so we want to use this moment here to take the time to recognize that power. to recognize that in Jesus Christ, we have the strength that we need to do what our God has given us to do. That's going to be Philippians chapter 4 and verse 13 for us. Philippians 4 and verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Now, we're familiar with the abundant misuse of that text. You'll see that one plastered in gems. I can lift the heaviest weights because I have Jesus to strengthen. That's not Philippians 4:13. Philippians 4:13 is I can do whatever my God has called me to do because he has given me the strength that I need. In my eyes, in the way of viewing this world by sight, I am weak and the odds are against me. But he gives me the strength that I need to do his work, to go into that promised land. I am strengthened by him. And as I do his work in this world, the scriptures tell us we are victorious. The scriptures tell us we are, what did they do in Canaan? They conquered the land. And the scriptures tell us we are conquerors. Let's consider Romans 8 and verse 37 here before we pick up that 1 Corinthians text. Romans 8 and verse 37. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Now coming to that 1 Corinthians 15 text and verse 57, where we read, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. I may be weak, but I'll tell you who gives me the victory. I'll tell you who makes me a conqueror. My God, who does that through my Savior. And for that, I will dare to stand, even when the odds are against me. Because if my God is for me, then who can be against me? What odds are there that can overcome me? If we can head back to Romans 8 just once more here in closing this evening. Romans 8 and verse 31. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And with God on my side, when all of a sudden I thought I was in the minority, and my God and his army are on my side as he stands by me and I stand by him in defense of him, and it looked like the odds are against me, and they're not. And so, let us dare to stand like Joshua and Caleb. Let us dare to stand. If we feel that we are alone, we aren't. And if we feel that the odds are against us, they aren't. Let us dare to stand for our God. Where are you at this evening? Are you standing for God, his way and his word? Or have you allowed the bad report of the land to come in and skew your way of thinking? The bad report has come in that says, it's not all worth it. Tell you what, back in Egypt, it was a lot more fun. Back in Egypt, we could do a lot more. We had bread to fill our bellies and water to drink and everything. Now that we think everything was quite glorious back in Egypt. And you've gone back to Egypt. You've gone back to the way of the world because the voice of the majority, the voice of the world has come in and skewed your thinking about God. Won't you turn away from that? Turn away from looking like this world around us, if you do, and dare to stand for our God. If we can help you with that at all, and help you in your walk with God, won't you come while we stand and sing the song selected? I have decided